My name is Barbara Keene, and at 29, I never imagined that giving my sister a kidney would become the moment that gutted my family to its foundation. Standing at the edge of her hospital bed, watching her thin chest rise and fall beneath a tangle of tubes and wires, should have been a sacred, solemn act of love, something clear and noble. But the years of parental stalemates, of promises dangled like bait and debts never repaid, had turned what should have been compassion into currency. I can still hear my father saying, "You want me to pay for something I never agreed to? You do this for her? You do it on your dime." The memory of him leaning against the doorframe of my childhood bedroom, arms folded and face unreadable, still lingers. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. Now, as the operation date draws closer, and everyone is watching me like I'm the solution instead of the sacrifice, something is beginning to stir deep inside me. They don't know it yet, but I've already started counting backward, from the day I stop asking to the day I start choosing. Before I get into what pushed me to make the choice no one in my family saw coming, let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like the price of being the good one just kept rising until it wasn't worth it anymore. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else has stood on that line between obligation and identity. The first time my mother brought it up, she did it like she was suggesting tea. We were standing in the kitchen, just the two of us, after the latest in a string of appointments that proved neither she nor my father could donate. "Barbara, I know this is a lot to ask," she said as she poured herself a glass of water, "but you're her best genetic match. You know that, right?" She didn't look at me, just stirred her lemon wedge in the glass like she was stalling her own conscience. I remember nodding because that's what I'd been trained to do. Nod, agree, handle it. "Of course," I said. "If it's me, it's me." She smiled a little too quickly and moved on, like we'd just crossed something off a shopping list. But I noticed she didn't ask if I wanted to. She didn't ask if I was scared, or if I'd even had time to think about it. It wasn't a question. It was a baton pass. And I took it. 2 weeks later, I was walking up the stairs to my dad's townhouse, a place I hadn't voluntarily visited in 6 years. I held the folder with my college transcripts, loan summaries, and a draft of the release agreement he'd insisted I bring. I hadn't told Mom. I hadn't told anyone. If I was going to do this, if I was going to put my body on the line for a family that only seemed to remember I existed when something needed fixing, then I was going to do it on terms I could stomach. He opened the door with a beer in hand and that same vacant look he always wore when something serious was coming. "You alone?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped aside. His place still smelled like old leather and microwave dinners. "You bring the papers?" he said before I even sat down. I handed them over. He skimmed the top page like he was scanning a car lease, then leaned back in his recliner and gave me a long, slow look. "I'm not signing anything until you're actually prepped for surgery," he said. "You could back out. I want to see it through the glass. Then I'll release the money." I swallowed hard. "You mean the money you promised in 2012? He smirked. "I mean the money that's still in my control. Let's not get romantic about it." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up and said, "Then I guess we'll see you at the hospital." I walked out without touching the water bottle he offered or looking back. Outside, it was already dark, and the cold air hit me like an accusation. In the days leading up to the procedure, my mom clung to my decision like it proved something about her own sacrifices. She brought me warm socks, protein bars, essential oils she claimed would help with the nausea. "You're doing something amazing," she said one night, brushing my hair back as I sat on the couch. I wish I could do it myself. I wanted to believe her, But the part of me that remembered her silence when Dad skipped out on tuition payments couldn't stop blinking. She'd said nothing then. Just like she said nothing when he walked away from joint custody or when I worked 2 jobs just to stay enrolled. Now she had tears. Now she had offerings. But she still didn't ask if I wanted to. Just that I would. The pre-op paperwork was brutal. Endless forms. Legal disclosures. Psych evals. They had me meet with the surgical ethics board, which felt more like a formality than protection. "You're fully informed of the risks," a woman with steel gray hair and no wedding ring asked. I nodded. "And you're doing this voluntarily?" I paused for a fraction of a second too long. She noticed. I shrugged. "She's my sister." When they called me the morning before surgery to confirm the check-in time, I asked if my father had arranged for the fund release with their billing office. The nurse was quiet for a moment, typing. "He did submit a notarized document," she said. "But it's contingent on the surgery being completed." "It's very clear." My stomach twisted. "Did he put that in writing?" "Yes," she said, gently. "It's in your file." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the time I babysat my sister every Saturday for free so Mom could work overtime. The time I gave up a scholarship to stay closer to home in case things got worse. The birthday where no one remembered because Grace had the flu. Every choice I'd made to keep this family from cracking wide open, and here I was, literally giving away a part of my body and still being made to negotiate for the scraps of a future I was promised a decade ago. On the morning of the surgery, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and lavender air freshener. Grace was pale and sweating, but she smiled when she saw me. "You sure?" she whispered, eyes glassy. I nodded. I didn't tell her I hadn't really been sure for weeks. I didn't tell her that the decision felt less like love and more like obligation wrapped in medical tape. She reached out her hand, and I took it. "You're saving me," she said. I wanted to say, "You were never the problem." But all I managed was a week, I know. The nurse came to wheel me out of the prep room, and as we passed the waiting area, I saw both my parents. Mom stood, hands clasped, eyes wide with hope. Dad stayed seated, scrolling through his phone like this was just another errand. Our eyes met for 1 second. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just mouthed, "Get it done." It was right then, that something broke loose in me, not like a scream, but like a quiet thread unraveling. I realized this wasn't about love, or family, or even survival. It was a transaction. My body for a signature. My silence for a savings account. And I was the only one paying interest. So I turned my head away from him and closed my eyes, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to remember who I was before this moment asked me to forget. And what happened in that operating room, it changed everything. Let me ask you something. If you had to choose between someone else's life and your own future, knowing you couldn't keep both, would you? Tell me below. I'll read every word. Because I need to know I'm not the only one who saw the price tag before they saw the promise. The first thing I saw when I woke up was the blue cast of the ceiling lights and the clock on the wall that seemed to hum louder than the machines. My throat burned, my side ached, and I wasn't sure if the wetness in my eyes was tears or the remnants of anesthesia. A nurse leaned over and smiled kindly. "Surgery went well, Barbara," she said softly, brushing a thermometer past my ear. "Your sister's in recovery too. She's stable." I tried to nod, but the world tilted. My hand instinctively reached for my side, just above the kidney line. It was real now. The thing I had feared, debated, and bartered had already been taken from me, while the people I'd done it for were nowhere in sight. I didn't ask where my parents were. I didn't want the answer. I didn't want to hear that they'd already gone home or were bickering in the cafeteria about who'd sacrificed more. I drifted in and out of sleep for hours, but it wasn't rest. It was more like waiting. When I finally stirred again, it was dusk. The sky beyond the window had turned lavender, and the quiet murmur of another patient's heart monitor filled the silence. My phone was on the tray table beside me. One new message. It was from Mom. "You did so good, honey. We're so proud. Going home to rest. Call us tomorrow." That was it. No photo of Grace. No visit to check if I could sit up. No word from Dad. Not even a nod to the agreement that had brought me here. The next morning, a social worker came in with a folder tucked to her chest. "Barbara," she began, in that overly calm tone professionals use when they're preparing you for disappointment, "we need to talk about your tuition release." I blinked slowly. My mouth was dry. "What about it?" She sat beside the bed, legs crossed delicately. "Your father submitted an amended statement overnight through the hospital's legal counsel. He claims the funds were only promised under the assumption that the surgery wouldn't impair your ability to return to work or school. Given the recovery period and your missed semester, he's rescinded the agreement." At first, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. I sat up too quickly, the stitches pulling, and hissed in pain. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I knew. I knew exactly what she was saying, and I think a part of me had always known. She opened the folder and showed me the notarized revision. It was his signature. Clean, confident, cold. "He's within his rights, legally," she said. "Morally, that's another conversation." I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I stared at the print until the words blurred. "And my mother?" I asked finally. "Did she say anything?" The social worker closed the folder. "She hasn't returned our calls." That was the moment the betrayal stopped being abstract. It wasn't a feeling anymore. It was ink on paper. It was silence on a phone. It was the empty chair beside my hospital bed. I had given them the one thing no one else could. I'd said yes when everyone else had said no. And in return, I got a promise unmade in the night, erased without explanation, without shame. That day, something sharp and permanent settled into my chest. Not rage exactly, but recognition. Grace came to see me on the third day, pale but glowing in a way I couldn't bring myself to resent. She was grateful. She held my hand like it still had magic in it, like I'd given her a future. "They say everything looks good," she whispered. "No rejection signs yet. I'll be on immunosuppressants forever, but you saved my life." I smiled because she needed me to, but I said nothing. What could I say? That her life had been bought with my future? That she was healthy now because I'd agreed to a deal I never believed would be honored? She didn't know about the tuition. She didn't know that while she was recovering, I was reading and rereading a legal void where my education used to be. She didn't know that I'd given more than just tissue. I'd handed over my trust, and someone I used to love had pocketed it like loose change. Later that week, I was discharged. Mom picked me up in the sedan she used to drive to PDA meetings. She had water bottles and a granola bar waiting on the passenger seat. "You okay to walk?" she asked, not making eye contact. I nodded. The drive was quiet except for the turn signal and the buzz of my phone, which I ignored. I waited until we were 2 exits from home before I said, "Dad pulled the money." She gripped the wheel tighter. "Barbara, please don't start." He submitted a statement that I wouldn't be able to go back to school in time, so he rescinded the release. She didn't answer at first. Her jaw tightened. "It's not ideal," she said eventually. "But it's not like you're not going to school eventually." "He's just worried." "He's not worried," I said, my voice rising. "He's manipulating. And you know it." She kept her eyes on the road. What was I supposed to do? Start a fight before the surgery? Risk you changing your mind? You wouldn't have. I stared at her profile, so familiar, so unreadable. "You mean I wouldn't have if you'd pushed it just right?" "Which you did. Like you always do." "I did what I had to," she snapped. "For Grace. For all of us." "No, Mom," I said, my throat closing. "You did what made it easiest for you to pretend we were still a family." She didn't speak for the rest of the drive. And when we pulled into the driveway, she didn't wait for me to get out. Just unlocked the doors and said, "You'll feel better once you've rested." Then she was gone. That night, alone in my childhood room, still painted mint green, still holding the ghost of who I used to be, I looked through the scholarship applications I'd kept in a box under my bed. Half of them had been mailed late. One was still sealed. I realized then that I'd spent more years than I wanted to admit hoping that if I just gave enough, they'd remember to give back. But giving doesn't always inspire gratitude. Sometimes it just trains people to expect more. 2 days later, Grace texted to ask if we could talk. I said yes. We met at the park by the lake, where we used to go when we were little and needed to pretend we were far away. She was bundled in a coat, face still soft from medication, and looked 10 years younger than me in that moment. "Why won't you answer Mom's calls?" she asked. "Because she let Dad strip me of the only leverage I had," I said flatly. Grace looked at her hands. "I didn't know. I didn't expect you to. That's not your burden." She hesitated. "But it is, in a way. I didn't ask you for this, Barbara. But I'm also the one who benefits. So, if you're hurting, I should know." Her honesty startled me. I didn't want to be angry at her. I wasn't. But I couldn't pretend anymore. "I don't regret saving your life," I said. "But I do regret thinking it would save mine." She nodded slowly, and for once, didn't try to fix it. Just sat beside me as the wind stirred the lake and the sun dipped low. We watched a flock of birds move in unison, scattering before disappearing into a field of gray. That night, I wrote an email. To the university. To a former mentor. To a foundation I'd once been too proud to ask for help. I explained everything, minus the betrayal. Just the facts. My health. My delay. My need. I hit send, not because I believed they'd save me, but because it was time to start saving myself. And just when I thought the worst had passed, something else arrived that would change everything again. Not a letter. Not a phone call. But a check, unsigned, slipped into my mailbox with no return address. The amount was exact. My tuition balance down to the penny. But it wasn't from my father. And I had no idea who sent it. What would you do if the person who helped you didn't even leave a name? Would you trust it or tear it up? Tell me in the comments. Because what I found out next made me question everything all over again. The envelope was cream-colored, heavier than usual, with no name or markings, just my address in neat block print. Inside was a personal check, folded once, with the memo line blank and no signature, but the amount was precise, $13,284.72. That was the exact total of my unpaid tuition, down to the final cent after scholarships and partial payments. I stared at it, sitting alone on the floor of my bedroom, one socked foot braced under my knee, my stomach hollow with confusion. It had to be a mistake. Or a joke. Or worse, a baited hook. But I couldn't stop staring at the numbers. Someone out there knew everything, and they weren't telling me who they were. I drove to the bank the next morning, still stiff from surgery, still haunted by my father's signature on a retracted promise. I asked the teller, an older woman with an engagement ring the size of a pebble and soft eyes, if she could trace the source. She frowned and called a supervisor, who explained gently that unless it bounced or involved fraud, they didn't disclose the account origin to non-account holders. "You can deposit it," she said, "or you can wait until you hear more." I hesitated. My name was written clearly on the pay to the order of line. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure I got this, quietly, without strings. But why? That night, I scanned it and emailed a copy to the university's financial office with a note that the payment was pending. I asked them to hold my registration open for the spring term. They agreed, fairly. Then I waited. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't tell Grace. I wanted to keep this one thing mine, just until I understood it. But I didn't have long to wait. 2 days later, I got a voicemail. The number was unfamiliar, the area code from 3 states away. The voice was a woman's, steady, low, and unfamiliar. "Barbara, I know you probably have questions. I'd like to meet. Tomorrow, if you're willing. I'll be at the Claymore Diner at noon." The check was real. This isn't a scam. She left no name. The Claymore Diner hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather booths. Same burnt coffee smell. Same waitress, too, Carla, with her purple lipstick and hair that always smelled like menthols. I took a corner booth, facing the door, my coat tight around my middle. I still moved slow. I still hurt. At 12:07, she walked in. Tall, late 50s, gray at the roots, and somehow familiar. She spotted me instantly, slid into the seat across from me like she belonged there. "I'm Helen Forrester," she said, offering a hand. "Your father's first wife." It took me a moment to process the words. I blinked. "What?" She gave a tight smile. "I didn't think he told you. He rarely tells the truth when silence benefits him." I didn't shake her hand. I folded mine under the table. "Why would you send me that check?" She shrugged, almost too casually. "Because I heard what he did. And I've been watching him leave girls like us behind for too long." I sat back slowly. "There are others?" "One more," she said. "A daughter. She's in Maine. She needed help once, too. He told her to get a job. She was 14. The silence stretched between us like a shadow. She stirred her coffee slowly, not looking up. "I followed the donor registry notifications," she added. "Public filings. I knew someone in the hospital who flagged it. When I saw your name, I knew it was you. I knew it was his." I cleared my throat, forcing the question out. "What made you pay for me?" She met my eyes then, and for the first time, I saw it, a fury years old, simmered to stillness. "Because he made you bleed for someone else's mistake. And because I wanted you to know that someone out there doesn't need your pain to be convenient to believe it." I didn't know what to say. I opened my mouth, closed it. Finally, I asked, "Why now?" She tilted her head. "Because I want you to get out. Finish school. Make your own money. Buy something with your name on the deed. Because that man has built a kingdom out of silence, and every time one of us climbs out, it crumbles a little." She left first, dropping a 20 on the table for coffee she didn't touch. As she stood, she said, "There's no debt." I don't want anything from you, Barbara. I just don't want him to win. I sat there long after she left. Carla refilled my tea twice, not asking questions. My mind was spinning with names, years, lies. I thought of my father, not just what he'd done to me, but what he'd built around it. The way he always made me feel like gratitude was a debt I could never fully repay. The way he made silence feel like survival. I'd always thought I was his daughter. His only daughter. I'd thought that gave me some kind of privilege. But now I saw it differently. I was just another chapter he hoped wouldn't talk back. That night, I told Grace everything. I met her in her room, where the light was dim and she was organizing pill bottles by the day of the week. She looked stronger, clearer. Her cheeks were pink again. So wait, she said slowly after I finished. Dad has another daughter? Two, technically, I said. One's me. One's in Maine. I don't know her name yet. Grace didn't blink. Are you okay? I gave a brittle laugh. Define okay. She patted the space beside her on the bed. I sat. You know, she said softly, I used to think you were just hard. Like you didn't want to be close. But I think now I get it. You weren't trying to be cold. You were protecting something. I glanced sideways. I didn't want to need anyone who could walk away. She nodded. He trained us for that, didn't he? That was the first time I heard her say it out loud, acknowledge that his absence had shape and weight, not just inconvenience. She picked up a framed photo of the three of us as kids. Do you still want to be part of this? She asked. Whatever this family is now. I was quiet for a long time. Then, I don't know. I think I want to build something that doesn't require me to bleed to belong. She nodded slowly. If you ever want help building it, I'm around. You saved my life. That doesn't mean you owe me your whole self forever. But I want you in mine. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an apology. But it was a beginning. The next week, I enrolled in my final semester. I moved into a shared apartment near campus. The stitches came out. The bills kept coming. But I started tutoring again, 1 hour at a time. The first paper I wrote was titled Inherited Silence, The Anatomy of Family Debt. I didn't name names. But I didn't lie either. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address again. This time, it was a photo. A girl, maybe 17, auburn hair, holding a guitar on a dock. Scrawled on the back were 4 words, she doesn't know yet. The handwriting matched Helen's. I folded the photo and slid it into the back of my journal. For now. But something had shifted. I no longer needed anyone's permission to call a debt what it was. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to name what they tried to forget. Have you ever found out a piece of your family was missing and that they meant to keep it from you? Let me know. Because I'm starting to believe the people we're told to forgive the fastest are often the ones who knew exactly what they were doing all along. The first time I stood outside my father's house after the surgery, I wasn't there to visit. I wasn't there for a holiday, or to deliver groceries, or to keep some strained peace. I was there because something in me had unlatched. Something I hadn't realized I'd been holding onto, some stubborn belief that if I played it right, kept calm, stayed useful, I'd eventually be treated like someone whose boundaries mattered. But it wasn't anger that drove me to press the doorbell that morning. It was clarity. Cold, precise clarity. I no longer wanted anything from him, and I needed him to know that. The door opened slower than I expected. He was wearing a fleece pullover and holding a mug. Barbara, he said, surprised but not surprised. He stepped aside without asking why I was there. Come in. I didn't. No, I said evenly. I'm not staying. He raised an eyebrow. Something wrong with the check, he said, almost amused. That stopped me. You think that was you? I asked, staring him down. He shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time someone forgot to say thank you. That check wasn't from you, Dad. Something flickered across his face, confusion, then dismissal. Then I guess someone else finally took pity on you. I stood there, motionless, for a long second. No. Someone else finally saw through you. His smile faded. You coming here just to throw attitude? I nodded. I came here to return something. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the original agreement he'd made me draft, the one where he promised to release my college fund once the surgery was complete. The one he later rescinded in legal silence. I'd added a note to it in thick black pen, void by cowardice. He reached for it. I didn't hand it over. I let it fall to the welcome mat at his feet. I won't ask you for anything again, I said, voice low. Not time. Not help. Not your name. You can keep all of it. You already made it worthless. He looked at me for a long time then. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he thought I'd beg again. But I just turned and walked back to my car, not because I had a plan, but because I had nothing left to lose by walking away. That moment didn't feel powerful. It didn't feel cinematic or triumphant. It felt clean. Like scrubbing a stain you'd gotten used to seeing every day. I didn't tell Grace about the visit. She'd made it clear she was with me, but I didn't want her caught between us again. Instead, I focused on my last semester. The early weeks were slow, heavy. My body ached more than I let on. But I went to class. I worked. I ate noodles at 11 p.m. and relearned what it meant to move through a day without apology. I started writing again, not essays or forms, but pieces of something real. I began documenting what it had felt like to be used as leverage in a family game where no one ever said the rules aloud. One Friday, Grace showed up on my doorstep with a box. "Mom gave me this to give you," she said. Said it was yours anyway. It was the old photo albums. The ones Mom used to keep on the highest shelf of the living room closet. I hadn't seen them since high school. Inside were pictures of us as kids' birthday hats, sticky hands, plastic kiddie pools. In most of them, I was holding Grace, feeding her, reaching for her hand. I studied one photo in particular. I must have been 11. Grace was 5, asleep against my shoulder on the porch swing. My eyes were open, watching something just outside the frame. The weight of her leaned into me, heavy and trusting. "You always looked out for me," Grace said, sitting beside me. I nodded. I didn't know how not to. She touched the corner of the page. "You don't have to anymore. Not unless you want to." That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, not for ceremony, but to clear the air. I found myself pacing, thinking. The picture of the auburn-haired girl still rested between the pages of my journal. Helen's daughter. My sister. Somewhere out there with no clue about any of this. I didn't know if I owed her something or if reaching out would help either of us. But I knew what it felt like to be left out of your own story. So I emailed Helen. The reply came 3 hours later. Simple. "She's 18 next week. I'll tell her then. If you're open to it, maybe you can write something for her to read when she's ready." I stared at the message. Not because I didn't know what to write, but because, for the first time, I had the right to tell the truth. Over the next few days, I drafted the letter slowly, deliberately. I didn't include names or accusations. I didn't warn her off or ask for a relationship. I told her that if she ever felt like something was missing, if there was a piece of her that didn't make sense, she wasn't imagining it. I told her I'd been there, and that someone in the world, quietly and without conditions, had once hoped she'd find her way to the full picture. I ended it with one line: "You don't have to answer this. But you deserve to know where you came from, even if some people tried to make sure you never would." I hit send. I didn't tell Grace. I didn't tell anyone. A week later, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a sheet of legal stationery and a check for $7,000. The letter was unsigned. The funds had come from a trust account. The note simply read, "For the remainder of what he owes." I stared at it for nearly an hour before depositing it. I knew who sent it. And I knew why. Helen wasn't trying to clean up his mess. She was making sure it didn't multiply. But that money, it did something else too. It freed me to make one more decision I hadn't realized I needed. I applied for a summer program in Portland. Out of state. Full-time. Paid. I wasn't sure I'd get it. But when the acceptance came, I stood in my kitchen, phone shaking in my hand, and I cried, not because I was happy, but because I wasn't afraid to leave anymore. On my last day in town, Grace walked me to the car. She tucked a note in my bag and hugged me tight. "Come back if you want," she said. "Or don't. You've done enough." I nodded. "So have you." And for the first time in years, I felt like a sister, not a savior. I drove away that morning with the windows down, the air cool and clean against my face. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't check my messages. I let the road stretch ahead like a blank page, not because I was running, but because I was finally writing my own beginning. But the story wasn't done yet. 2 weeks into the program, I got an email. Subject line: "I think I'm your sister." The message was brief, thoughtful, unsure. She signed her name, Melody. She wanted to talk. And I didn't hesitate. "Would you open that door if it meant facing everything your parents hid from you? Or would you stay safe, knowing some truths might hurt more than silence ever did?" The call with Melody was scheduled for a Sunday morning, the kind of early June day where the sky looked too polished to be real and the breeze off the water made everything seem softer than it should have been. I sat at the edge of my dorm mattress, laptop open, her name blinking on the screen. She'd written the night before, short, hesitant, careful. "Would it be okay if we did a video call? Just once?" She ended it with, "If it's too much, I understand." But it wasn't too much. Not anymore. When her face appeared, it was like looking through a window into a version of myself I'd never met. She had Dad's eyes, same gray-green, same narrow set, but none of his hard edges. Her voice was clear but tentative. "Hi," she said first, barely above a whisper. "It's weird seeing someone who looks like me." I smiled gently. "Yeah, it's strange for me too." We didn't dive into the heavy things right away. She told me she played guitar, wanted to be a nurse, lived with her mom and stepdad in a small town where everyone still waved from their porches. I told her I was finishing my last semester, working in a research lab, planning to apply for a fellowship. We danced around the middle for a while, how we got here, what we wanted. Then the real part came. "So, when did you find out about me?" she asked. Her hair was pulled into a low ponytail, and I noticed how often she bit the inside of her cheek when she was nervous. I took a breath. "About 2 months ago. After my surgery. After some other things blew up." She didn't flinch. And Helen's the one who reached out? I nodded. She tilted her head. She always said I had an older half-sibling, but she never talked about you by name. Said you might not want anything to do with us. I didn't know you existed, I said quietly. Until she showed me your photo. She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. She gave me your letter. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Not awkward, just full. I read it 3 times, she said. I cried the second time. Not because I was sad. Just because it made me feel not crazy. That was the moment I knew this was worth it. That writing her wasn't a mistake. I hadn't stepped into someone else's life. I'd returned something that was always missing. We stayed on the call for an hour. Then another. She asked me what he was like our father. I answered truthfully, but gently. I told her the things I knew and the things I'd learned the hard way. She didn't ask why he'd never come for her. She didn't need to. We both knew there wasn't an answer that would help. By the time we hung up, she said, I don't know if I'm ready to meet yet, but I'm really glad you didn't ignore me. I smiled. Me too. After the call, I walked to the shoreline just past the campus buildings. The gulls were loud that day, and the water shimmered with that restless, wide energy it always had after a night storm. I stood on the edge of the wooden dock, thinking about all the daughters my father had left behind, and all the women those girls had become without his hand to shape them. We'd grown in the gaps he left. And maybe that was the only legacy he'd ever intended. A few days later, I got a package in the mail. No return address again. Inside was a thick manila folder, clipped and labeled. At first, I thought it was another check. But it wasn't. It was documentation. Bank records. Property holdings. A full summary of the trust account Dad had set up years ago, one that Helen had never touched. But more importantly, it included a letter. It was written in her hand, sharp and clean. Barbara, you asked once why I helped. This is the other reason. If you ever decide to pursue what he kept from you, his assets, his legal obligations, I want you to have this. Not because you owe me anything, but because I believe one of us deserves to walk away with more than scars. The folder sat on my desk for a week before I opened it again. I didn't know what to do with it. Legal action? Restitution? Revenge? None of it felt like a solution. But it felt like power, quiet, buried power I hadn't known I needed. Summer moved quickly. I spent my days in the lab, evenings tutoring local students who didn't blink when I told them science wasn't always about answers, but about endurance. Grace and I texted every few days. She was working part-time, slowly adjusting to her new medication schedule and taking a community college writing class just to see. One night, she sent me a photo of a journal she'd started. The caption just said, "Trying your trick." I smiled and didn't reply. She didn't need my approval anymore. And that made me proud. Then came the email from Mom. She wanted to meet. Just lunch, she wrote. No agenda. I sat with that message for 2 days. My chest tightened every time I saw her name in my inbox. We hadn't spoken since the car ride after my discharge. The night she chose silence over truth. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I was just different now. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place she used to take us after piano recitals. She wore a light blue sweater and too much mascara. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her tea. You look good, she said first. So do you, I lied gently. She exhaled slowly. I know I wasn't there the way you needed. I didn't speak. I know what your father did, she added. I knew before the surgery. I let it happen. Still, I said nothing. She looked away. I told myself it was for Grace. That if I pushed back, the whole thing would fall apart. But it fell apart anyway, didn't it? I studied her face. She looked older now. Or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time. I can't change any of it, she said. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because I expect anything. I just needed you to hear it from me. For the first time in a long time, I let myself soften. Thank you, I said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a place to rest the weight for a minute. When we stood to leave, she handed me a small envelope. It's not money, she said quickly. Just something you left behind. Inside was a photo. Me, Grace, and her, at the state fair, all grinning, all sunburned, all before everything broke. I thought you might want to remember the parts that were good, she said. I tucked it into my bag and nodded. As I walked back through town, past the bookstore, past the mural of the woman with wings painted across the library wall, I realized something. I wasn't afraid to come back anymore. And I wasn't afraid to leave again either. Later that night, Melody messaged me. She'd been accepted into a college near Boston. She was scared, but excited. Will you come visit sometime? She asked. I stared at the screen, then typed back, you bet. I'll bring donuts. And for once, my promises weren't made of obligation. They were just mine to give. By the end of the summer, the old scars had settled into my skin like quiet reminders. I wasn't healed, but I was grounded. And I was done living on the edge of everyone else's comfort. My name was back on the university's alumni list. I had a plane ticket to Boston. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up with the sense that I owed anyone anything just to be allowed to keep breathing. But the story still had one more thread left to pull. Something I hadn't counted on. A letter from the hospital. A mistake in the billing. Or so they claimed. And when I opened it, I found out the thing that made everything I'd done, the donation, the betrayal, the deal, so much harder to accept. Because someone had lied. Not just about money, but about who really could have saved Grace. And it wasn't just me. If you found out you weren't the only one who could have given everything, would you still have done it? Tell me. Because I had to ask myself that every day after. And the answer was never as simple as yes or no. It arrived on a Thursday, 3 days after I mailed my final rent check and 2 days before my flight to Boston. The envelope bore the hospital's logo, sharp and clinical against white. I assumed it was billing, something minor, a duplicate receipt, maybe a satisfaction survey I wouldn't fill out. But the thickness of it gave me pause. When I opened it, I found 3 documents, a lab report, an addendum from the Hospital Ethics Committee, and a cover letter. The first line of the letter said, "We are contacting you in response to a recent internal audit regarding preoperative donor eligibility." The words blurred for a moment. I sat on the edge of my bed and read the rest slowly, sentence by sentence. The report showed blood work results taken from both my parents during initial testing. My father had always claimed he was ruled out as a donor because of high blood pressure and a borderline glucose reading. That was the story repeated over and over at dinner, in the waiting room, on the drive home from the consultation. But the truth was there in black and white. He'd been a viable match. His disqualification hadn't been medical. It had been elective. He'd declined to proceed, citing emotional distance from the recipient. The ethics committee had flagged it, but because I'd already volunteered and the family had mutually agreed on my donation, the file had been archived. He could have done it. He could have spared me the surgery, the scar, the 6 weeks of exhaustion, the quiet deal over tuition, the betrayal, the folder of documents from Helen, the sleepless nights, and that hollow feeling of having been nothing but a bargaining chip in a family where love came second to leverage. He could have donated and chose not to. The air in the room shifted. It felt thinner. I stared at the ceiling and didn't move for a long time. Later that night, I walked to the edge of the city park and sat on the bench by the river, the one with initials carved into the wood and weeds pushing through the cracks in the pavement. I didn't bring the documents. I didn't bring my phone. I just sat there, watching the water move the way it always did, never still, always carrying more than it showed. I thought about writing him, calling, showing up at his door one more time. But what would I say? That I knew? That I had proof? That I could finally call his cruelty by name? No, that wasn't mine to carry anymore. The point wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the release. I spent my last morning in town walking Grace through her follow-up plan. She seemed lighter now. Her hair had grown back in soft waves, and she smiled more often. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She knew something had shifted, but she didn't push. She just hugged me tighter than usual at the airport and said, "I'm proud of you." On the plane, I watched the clouds through the oval window, my journal open on my lap. I wrote one sentence before the seatbelt sign went off. Sometimes you love people so much you forget to ask if they're even trying. Boston was noisy, crowded, alive. My program cohort was small but tight-knit. Researchers, social workers, students with complicated stories. I found myself walking differently, not faster, but steadier. I was tired of carrying my goodness like a shield. I wanted it to be a choice, not a defense. 2 weeks in, I got a postcard from Melody. It had a picture of a lighthouse and said, "Guess who passed her first chem quiz?" I pinned it above my desk and sent one back. Knew you would. We didn't talk every day, but she was there, a thread stitched quietly through the new life I was making. I still hadn't told her about Dad, about the lie, about the fact that he could have stepped up and didn't. I didn't know if she needed that yet. I didn't know if she ever would. Some truths are like open windows in winter. They let in clarity, but they don't always warm you. One night, as I walked back to my apartment, I passed a father and daughter sitting on a stoop. He was fixing the strap on her sandal while she told a story with her whole body, arms flying. He listened. He laughed. He didn't look away. I didn't feel envy. I didn't feel robbed. I felt distance. Clean and solid. Like watching a play you were never cast in and finally realizing you didn't want the role anyway. I kept the documents from the hospital in a file box at the bottom of my closet. Not out of fear. Not even as evidence. Just as memory. Proof that I hadn't made it up. That all those sleepless nights, all those quiet humiliations, all those moments I thought, maybe it's me, weren't just ghosts. A month before the program ended, I got an email from Grace. She'd been accepted into the full degree track for nursing. "Turns out we're not done being donors," she wrote. "Just maybe in new ways." I laughed when I read it. Then I cried. Then I opened a blank document and started to write, not for class, not for a scholarship, not for an application. Just for me. Just to finally say it all in my own voice. I wrote about family like a structure that didn't hold, like scaffolding missing bolts. I wrote about giving without asking and how that can feel like love until it becomes survival. I wrote about silence and how some of us learn to break it without screaming. A week later, I read that piece aloud at a local open mic. I didn't say names, but I told the truth. And when I finished, a woman in the back stood up and whispered, "Thank you." Afterwards, I sat on the curb outside the coffee shop, alone for a moment, the summer air thick with streetlights and possibility. I took out my phone and typed a message I hadn't known I was ready to send. To Helen. Thank you for doing what he never did. For seeing me. Not just when I was useful, but when I was broken and silent and too tired to ask for help. I don't know what to do with all of this, but I know I'm different now. I know I'm not afraid anymore. That's because of you. I didn't wait for a reply. Some things don't need answers to be complete. My name is Barbara Keene. I gave my sister a kidney. My father gave me a lesson. My mother gave me silence. But other women, strangers, half-sisters, mentors, gave me something they never could. They gave me myself. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I don't know if you've had to learn your worth the hard way or if someone ever made you trade pieces of yourself just to belong, but if you have, I hope this story reminds you that surviving doesn't mean staying quiet. It means choosing your own ending, even if it starts in pieces.